I've made some notes down here on the back of my my ID card here because just listening to 3 of these life stories now, and I'm looking forward to Cameron's, but they've made me break into a cold sweat as I've thought about my own decisions over my career. I have a motivational poster that's in my office, and it's a beautiful sunset and over the ocean. And but obviously there's a ship that's going down. There's just the bow of the ship is sticking out of the water, and the saying below it is, it could be that the purpose of your life is simply to serve as a warning to others. And so sometimes I feel that way. I like to say I've had many failed careers, but I would have to say I've enjoyed them all. One of the things, what has caught my attention as I've listened to our first 3 speakers is thinking of the connections of the things that result in us making some changes in our life. The economy, our inherent interests, of course, are obviously drivers in what we do. Philip's comments about persona, I think, are interesting, and I'll talk a little bit about later about how I think that adds stress to us in some ways. I think as graduate students, just out of curiosity, how many of you are science or applied health science masters? Okay, how many social science humanities? Just curious, okay. And business, let's say? Okay, a few of the business ones. No, good mix. But you know, we're all graduate students, or you are all graduate students, and I think the common thing there probably among all of us who have gone on to graduate work is an ambition, and probably an intellectual ambition, an inquisitiveness, although I'd probably say that a lot of my choices were made with money as the focus. And so I'll start my story. I like to blame my first career choice on my father. I grew up, and I grew up in Montreal, and we always had a cabin, a cottage, and so I always spent a lot of time in the woods, and I'd be fishing and you know, out in the woods a lot, and my father encouraged that, and so when it came time to choose something that I would study, I was very interested in the outdoors, and I gravitated toward geology. And I did so because I inherently liked the idea of the field, and I'd also heard that you made a lot of money, so you know, I thought that would be a good thing to do. And I think an important thing to keep in mind whenever you're choosing or making these career decisions is to gather full information, because what I understood a geologist would do is that they worked in the office most of the time, but now and then they would go to some remote area and they would bring their fishing rods and they would do a bit of fishing, they'd look at the odd rock. So after becoming a uranium exploration geologist, and after countless times of being in the tent and once a week the helicopter bringing the food, I realized that, you know, this wasn't the career that I thought it was going to be. And so there's a couple of things that led me to make a change there. But one of the things, and I'm just wondering if any of you have experienced that, is that also geology was my first interest and love. But over the 4 years of the undergraduate degree, in a sense, I had a yearning for something different. I had sort of learned a lot of what I wanted to know. And to some extent, I just felt I wanted something different. And so that led me down the path to a master's in business administration. At that time, I was working in northern Saskatchewan. I went to the University of Saskatchewan. And there was some stress at that point. And I think stress occurs in our lives when we have defined our persona, We have chosen a field of study. I was a geologist. And there was this realization that I might not want to be a geologist. and that creates a lot of stress because we define our persona and then we decide we're going to make a change. And we're not sure how that's going to go. And so I did a master's in business administration. I did have some idea about that. Was a common career path, particularly for engineers and geologists. The MBA was a very transformational degree, and it is pretty much for anybody who enters into it who's not studied business before. And it's also a degree that does give a lot of options. So I think Ashley's comment about keeping options open was always in my mind as well. And even when I was at the undergrad level, I did take in my selection of courses things that I thought might lead to business, might keep options open. And so that led me into a different area, a different field. And I guess coming back to inherent interests as well, I think over my career, I've realized there were things that I like to do or enjoy doing, and that has driven me into a certain direction as well. And one of the things, of course, that I've always enjoyed doing is working with quantitative data and analyzing it. And I noticed that when I was even in the geology side. So in the MBA, I became interested in the finance area, and I graduated. And you know, hearing some of the choices that people have made, particularly focused around how economic events can affect that. I was always maybe a little bit ahead of economic disaster, because having left geology in 1981, there was a major recession. Many of you might not know that, very similar to 2008, and I got out of that field just in time because you know, by 1982, you probably couldn't have gotten a job as a geologist if your life depended upon it. So I skirted ahead and did the MBA. But when I graduated from the MBA, I went to the convocation ceremonies, and at that time, the economy was still relatively bad. So it was handy that I was able to go down to the unemployment office right after convocation and apply for unemployment insurance, because you know, there wasn't too many jobs at the time. But 6 months later, I did start working with Shell Canada as a financial analyst, and worked in the oil industry for a couple of years doing that. Again, you know, a persona change came about which created stress, in the sense that I had gone from being a geologist, this person that hammer in one hand, you know, carving an existence out of the wild, to a person sitting in an office in a large multinational corporation. And I didn't know if that met my persona. And I think something that Alan hinted at, not wanting to work for somebody. And I think as a geologist, I didn't have as much of I maybe had a bit more freedom, but once I was in a large multinational corporation, I had that sense that, you know, I'm not entirely sure I want to work for somebody in the sense that working in such an organization was. And so then you have you know, again, the stress comes about as you decide on a change in your persona. You've defined yourself as a financial analyst in the oil industry, and suddenly you start saying, well, you know, I might want to do something else. And I remember I had a job interview in Edmonton. I was in Calgary at the time, but I went to Edmonton for a job interview with the Energy Resources Conservation Board. And at that time, the person I was with, my spouse, she was going to start a PhD in organizational behavior. And so almost out of a whim, I went from the job interview in Edmonton to the University of Alberta and applied and entered the doctoral program in finance. And but it was stressful, because I knew, in a sense, I felt there was a closing of options. You know, if I went down this path, you know, it would lead to, you know, a certain career. So I think I think those are the key points that we find are stressful in life, is when we're changing persona, we decide we're going to do something different. And if we feel there's a closure of options, you know, those are also, you know, very stressful periods. I'm going to end the story there. It went taught at a couple of different universities, including the University of Saskatchewan, where I'd done my MBA, and then University of Northern British Columbia in Prince George, BC, before coming to Brock in '95. I find it interesting that my own research right now in the use of weather derivatives, which are a certain type of financial contract, to hedge or mitigate the risks of weather, is of it's fascinating to me that I've sort of come around back in some sense to the earth sciences. I have myself, I'm analyzing weather data these days using the same econometric techniques that we would use for stock market returns. And I'm greatly enjoying that, because I get to combine these two things of interest back from the initial one, you know, ending in the last one. You know, I think the story is very much the same as what we've heard from Philip, Ashley, and Alan. You know, there's a whirlwind of uncertainty. I can't say I had a network in my choices, so I oftentimes made them, I guess, you know, very much on my own, and you know, I of course did not have the pressures of family as well. I don't have any children that I know of, and so, you know, that allowed me to commit myself, you know, to my career, perhaps, you know, more extensively in some areas. But it will be stressful, but I think you all have something very common, and that is the fact that if you've gone into graduate studies, you've wanted something more, and you're continuing to go on. And it's that need for something new, probably, that drives a lot of us to undertake that form of study. All right, thank you.